The ironic truth is, Shozi, I realized in late 2025 that my entire identity has been occupied since the day I was born.
Welcome to another episode of the Olive Roots podcast. I'm your host, Chosi Ayu. Today we have someone very special. He's a Palestinian American elite cyclist. His name is George Qadado. George,
Ahla sahla, nice to meet you, Shozi. Thank you for meeting
nice
with
to
me.
meet you too, brother. How's your day going?
It's going well. Busy start to the new year. There's a lot of craziness in the world, but it doesn't slow down the impact of our work and what we're trying to do for ourselves and then for our people.
I agree. So where are you located?
So I live in Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital city, Virginia. It's central, and I grew up just outside of the Washington, D.C. area in the Virginia suburbs.
Oh man, you're where all the action is.
Sort of. There's definitely a good Arab American community in the D.C. area. It's not quite the same as Dearborn, of course, but a lot of influential policymakers and folks involved, certainly, of course.
Yeah, well, I'm in Georgia. There's not many Palestinians or Arab Americans here. I'm like the only one down here.
I definitely feel that there's not many of us here in Richmond, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. Why I
Yeah.
live in Richmond, of all places. So
Well, George, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. The first thing we'll do is I want you to share your identity with the audience. So tell the audience what's your ethnic background, where's your family from, and their journey in coming to America and you being born.
absolutely, thank you, Josie. Fantastic line of questioning. So my name is George Qadado, and I am first generation, born to two parents, Min Nasri, Min Nazareth. And so my father emigrated to the U.S. in the late 70s for career pursuits. The job opportunities were quite limited, and so he had spent his bachelor years with his cousins, my ammos, uh, living here in the U.S. in the D.C. area. He went back in 1990 to find a wife and bring her back to the U.S. And of course, you know how these things go in Arab culture. It's so and so's sister is available, and oh, my brother is available, and so it's sort of that Kazite arranged marriage, pretty typical. And so my mother and my father came to the U.S. in 1990, and I was born in 1991, and have lived in the U.S. my entire life.
Wow. So both parents from occupied Palestine in Nazareth.
Yes, in Nazareth, and yes, the unfortunate reality is that Nazareth currently is in Israel proper, and then it is what it is. But yeah, that is where I claim my heritage. Is most of my family is in Nazareth. I do have family in Bethlehem as well as Haifa, and so I enjoy having family and connections from all over the homeland.
So, how much do you know the story of your grandparents with the Nakba of 1948 and anything related to that you're aware of?
So this is a great question, Josie. As far as I've been able to try and learn for myself, my paternal grandmother from my father's side was a refugee from Lebanon. And so I know that she is of half Syrian and Lebanese ancestry. And so technically, I've tried to trace my family roots, and I'm, I think, three-quarters Palestinian technically, with an eighth Lebanese and an eighth Syrian. Would still consider myself fully Palestinian to the heart. And so my mother's side of the family is one of the largest families in Nazareth and has been there for many millennia. And my father's side is newer as of the last 100 years or so to Nazareth. As far as the history of Palestine and the developments, I represent what I think I see in a lot of first and second generation Arab Americans, which is a little bit of quietness around the conflict. There's fear, and I don't think we talk about the fear enough that our parents live in. The fear to talk about the name of the occupiers, the history of it. I recently asked my mother about this and trying to learn about myself. And so my mother in Nazareth grew up in Catholic high school. And she had explained to me that the way they teach history now, or at least for the last 30, 40 years in Nazareth, is that they don't talk about the Nakba as much. They will talk a little bit about the formation of Israel. And I think that just goes to show that the erasure of identity is something that doesn't just happen with the murder and martyrdom of people. It happens with ideas. It happens with successive generations. And so I've had to, as a Palestinian American, learn about myself the whole time as I've grown up living in America. And I'll be honest, Josie, it wasn't until I was about 12 or 14 years old where I first heard the word Palestine. And I started to read about it. And I said, well, Mama, we speak Arabic at home. And we are Masihi, we are Christian. I grew up Melkite, actually. And so I'm very strong with my faith. And I'll get to that later on. But I said, we're not Jewish. And so you keep telling me growing up that we are Israeli American, or Israeli Arab. And so I've spent a lot of time, Josie, trying to analyze myself, take a look at myself, and really examine what does this identity of Arab Israeli really entail? Because this is a common perspective and an identity that a lot of Arab Americans have from Palestine. And so I think we need to kind of break down those walls and identity and talk about the truth and the reality, things that have been distorted. And we see these things here in the US as well about how we can change our history by changing what we talk about with our kids, what we teach in history classes. And so that's where I come from in terms of my knowledge on the conflict growing up. Now, as an adult, I figured things out for myself. Back in 2009, when I had started college, I was actually one of the first SJP student members for the Students for Justice in Palestine club at Purdue University. I enjoyed emceeing and introducing Norman Finkelstein when he had come to talk about This Time We Went Too Far, which is one of his most notable books in the last 10 or 15 years, talking about the Gaza invasion from about 15 years ago. And so ever since my early formative years in college, I've really become more vocal for the cause, become more active. And this sort of, meshes with my identity as an Arab American and a Palestinian American, which I would firmly cling to. And so I picked up cycling as an adult, quite late in life. I learned how to ride a bike as a kid. But at about age 25, I had gotten myself into organized bike racing here in America, which is a very popular amateur sport. I never thought this would ever be my life, but over the last 10 years, I've been racing at a very, very high level. And over the last 2 years, especially with the genocide and the martyrdom of so many of our people in Gaza, I've really taken a look and analyzed where is my place in the world and what can I do to be as impactful for them as possible? Of course, we always try to raise money. We go to demonstrations, but what could I do? And so sometime around 2023, I actually had met the Gaza Sunbirds. And as soon as I met them and discovered who they were, I said, these are my people. And so in 10 or 11 years of racing my bike, I have never found Palestinians on a bike. And so it was always funny to me. And so to find people halfway across the world that love the same passion for racing bikes, for being a part of the culture, and as part of Arab cultures where I've been often told, well, I've never heard of Arabs on bikes. There's no such thing. Shuyani Juju, what is this? So this is something I still get to this day. But as I talk about it, I'm trying on this path right now to officially represent Palestine on the track in international cycling. And so I've been massively successful over the last 2 years trying to get my name out there. I race quite well here on the Western Hemisphere in North and South America, while the Sunbirds kick butt in Europe and in North Egypt and in the Arab countries. And so even despite having such limited infrastructure and no equipment that works and roads that don't work in Gaza, they still train and race and place incredibly well at the international UCI paracycling stage. And so they inspire the best out of me on a day to day to match their conviction, and match their purpose, representing ourselves as individuals, but also all of Palestine. And so I'm the only able bodied cyclist in the world right now, able to represent Palestine in this capacity. And despite having no sponsors, and much like other Palestinian athletes such as Valerie Terezi, I don't make any money doing this. I actually lose quite a bit of money, and everything comes out of my pocket as a full time employee, for a company in DC. And so I don't make any money off of pro cycling, but it is impactful, and it is showing, wow, Palestinians do belong on the world stage, and we are just as competitive and just as disciplined as any other rider or any other athlete from any other country.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. So the first portion was the Arab Israeli identity, then we'll move to the cyclist identity. It's interesting because if you're born in occupied Palestine, also known as Israel, you're considered Arab Israeli. So they want to erase that Palestinian identity. And they always say Jews and Palestinians, or Jews and Arabs, which is an oxymoron to me, always been, try to collude the name of a Palestinian. Because I always said, if you want to say Jews, then you got to say Muslims and Christians, because a Jew is just somebody who follows Judaism. So if you want to say Jew, you got to say Muslim or Christian. If you want to say Palestinian, then you got to say Israeli. If you want to say Arab, well, Arab can be Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, or Durzi, or Assyrian, or Aramean, or whatever, right? So that always been troubling to me, because they try to strip the identity of Palestinian living in Israel, and they say Arab Israeli. And I'm like, nah, that's not what we are. You colonized and you claim you come from the land, but a DNA test will easily prevail the truth, which is illegal there for obvious reasons. So your family comes from occupied Palestine under the Israeli regime, and Nazareth was predominantly Christian. And
Yes.
now there's barely Christians left in Nazareth, and they build around it all these settlements. And the Palestinian community, the Arab community there, is messed up from what I know. Everything is upside down in Nazareth. Beit Lahem was predominantly Christian. Now it's 20-25% Christian. And no, people, it's not because of the Muslims, it's because of the Israeli Jews, because we lived in peace before 1948. They always try to sell that Muslim Jewish fight, right? As if the Christians of Palestine don't exist. So going to your cyclist, wow, I didn't know that there was a team in Gaza that cycles.
Yes. So, we definitely know about Palestinian football players and pro fighters and wrestlers, but there's so much diversity. So I'm proud to represent the Gaza Sunbirds here in the U.S. And so the Gaza Sunbirds are a paracycling team. They all are missing a leg or a foot due to being shot or bombed by the occupation. And as mentioned, despite having such limited equipment, no working infrastructure, and working with the support of a lot of cyclists in the international community, they still do incredibly well. And so it is beyond inspiring that even despite having less than nothing, to just put yourself out there. Now, Chosi, since October 8th, over 800 Palestinian athletes have been killed. And so that's part of the reason why it's become my life's purpose, really, to represent Palestine in as best of a capacity as I can, with the legs that God has given me. And so I find it such a blessing. And to your point, there is a huge diversity of athletes that come from Palestinian backgrounds. Athletes such as Valerie Terezi, who I mentioned, who is Palestinian Canadian and is a fantastic Olympian swimmer. There is the Gaza Skate Club, and they are a skate club that empowers youth, young girls, boys, folks of all ages to skate. There's the Palestinian Climbing Association based out of Jerusalem. And so I don't know if you know, but we have folks that travel internationally all around the world climbing for us. And so, just like our religious backgrounds and our ethnic backgrounds, there's such a diversity to the athletics that we do as Palestinians and folks from Arab ancestry.
Wow, man. So I got goosebumps when you said that the team in Gaza that is joining the cycling team is missing body parts because of the occupation, the bombing, and disabilities and whatnot. That is wow, man. Yeah, I have no idea about that. That's insane. But yeah, they killed many athletes. I know some soccer players, football players that they assassinated. So I'm sure there were cyclists that they took out, just like the journalists and everybody else. We already know that the count is more than 500,000. They keep talking about 30,000. We know the number is higher. So tell me a little bit about what got you into cycling. What made you start when you bought your first bike? And how did it just keep going to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chezzy. So growing up, I had a very, I think, typical first generation Palestinian American childhood where I might have played soccer for a few years as a kid growing up. But my parents at a certain point by middle school had said, you're going to focus on academics and we're going to get you into a good college. I think you know how this conversation goes. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. There's very limited options of what we will tell you is acceptable. And so I enjoyed playing soccer and I had this athleticism as a kid. I say that's when my big legs really started to grow in, but I didn't do much with athletics in high school. And so I was focused on SATs and AP classes, focused on getting into great colleges and all my college applications. And so when I was about 21 years old, I had some friends say, look, we just got into riding bikes just around town for fun. And so I purchased a Trek hybrid bicycle, which is upright with wide bars. And I just rode around for fun at 21 or 22. It wasn't until I moved to Richmond in 2014 to finish my undergraduate in math at Virginia Commonwealth University that I really found myself falling into bike culture. I found myself getting into bike racing completely backwards, Josie. I started as a bike punk. I wasn't healthy. Loved heavy metal music, loved photography, which are, I think, pursuits that a lot of Arab Americans fall into. We are just like any other normal American group. And so we have American friends of all backgrounds, especially when there aren't a lot of Palestinians around you growing up. And so you get exposed to all the great things about culture in America, including the athletics. And so as I got more and more into cycling, I found myself getting kind of serious about wanting to compete and doing more things with it. And so I found myself putting down the camera that I enjoyed shooting with and selling all my camera equipment. I found myself loving fixed gear bikes, which are the most basic form of bicycle with one single speed and no brakes and no cables. And over the last 10 years, I found myself racing and winning at some very fun bike races up and down the East Coast in America, but as myself, as an American. And so things didn't really come full circle until, like I had mentioned, around 2023. I had discovered the Gaza Sunbirds and reached out to them and said, I'd love to figure out how can I get involved? What do things look like long term? Where do you compete? I've to this day promised the Sunbirds that when the genocide is over, and it will be over, inshallah, very soon, I would love to help coach them and support, develop that next generation of Palestinian cyclists and Palestinian athletes. And so it is, like I said, not anything I make money out of, and it is very expensive, but I bring myself all over the world now. And despite having no support myself, I'm proud to be in the top 350 UCI ranked track cyclists in the world. And so I'm crossing my fingers that if I can get some movement with the bureaucratic mess that I'm sort of in with the officiating body, that I can officially represent Palestine at some big Asian championships this year in 2026.
Wow, that's huge, man. That
Thank
is
you.
huge. So, so when you're cycling and doing all these competitions or journeys that you guys go on, You are not making money from this.
No, I bring myself to races, and especially with track cycling, it is very much an individual sport a lot of the time. So I need to bring myself to races. I need to work on my own equipment. I need to organize travel. I need to figure out what events are going on. And so in 2025, this is the biggest year of racing we just had this past season. I spent about 2 months in Trinidad racing against some of the best athletes in the world for North and South America. And despite the the terribleness of the genocide and how many Palestinians continue to be killed on a day to day, and how little I feel like I can affect things on a day to day with what's going on there. I know that the impact I'm making with communicating with folks, with letting the world know that Palestinian cyclists do exist and we are diverse and we do a lot of things. And we belong on the world stage competing with every other country just like anyone else does. Sports is dignifying and it is humbling. And so even despite the genocide, I've been blessed to have made friends in Egypt that are cyclists, in Algeria and all over the world. And so it is very much a communal community of folks within athletics. And I think athletics should be the best way that we compete as countries across the world. A little bit of recent history, I think a lot of people are remiss to forget, is that in the modern industrialized world, the Olympics were designed to be the ground by which we competed against each other. Since 1896, the Olympics were designed for countries in Europe, in the Americas, to see who was the strongest country. And this history is soon forgotten by 1936, with the 1936 Berlin Olympics. And Adolf Hitler was very unhappy with the success of Jesse Owens, an African American runner who was incredibly successful. And so we went into World War II as a global society. And since then, over the last almost 100 years, we have been a global society that is focused on competing with each other based off of war and occupation and colonialism. But it is pragmatic that I believe that the right path forward is to compete in academics, to compete in sports and in more noble pursuits and more peaceful pursuits, and to realize that war is just not necessary. Occupation is not necessary. And especially as someone who is Palestinian American and proudly identifies as Palestinian American, but who had to figure out my own identity from parents who would tell me growing up that they were Arab Israeli, it really comes full circle to really live a life that means a lot of purpose to me. I can take the legs that God has given me. I can take conviction and identity and purpose. I can show the world and Americans who don't know anything about Palestinians or other Palestinian Americans that if you don't know about the conflict and if you don't know about the people, look at myself, look at the Sunbirds, look at the other influential news outlets and journalists like Mataz and Palestia, who are still speaking up about our people and who are giving that light and that visibility to the Palestinians. Because at the end of the day, the more visibility we can give to Palestine, the stronger it will end up becoming.
Indeed, I agree. So, what's the situation in the sponsors? Is that something that can help you, and what is the holdup in getting some sponsors?
Certainly. So, to the points I was mentioning earlier, the UCI, which is the International Cycling Board, they manage the Tour de France and all of the international bike races that go on around the world. I am working with them to try and formally change my nationality from American to Palestinian. And so I'm a born and raised American, and my international race license is issued by the US. And just to show you, Chosi, on my US birth certificate issued from here in Virginia, my parents' place of birth is listed as Israel, not Palestine. And so this has put me in a bit of a bureaucratic mess where the ironic truth is, Chosi, I realized in late 2025 that my entire identity has been occupied since the day I was born. And so anyone that might say, well, George, you're not connected to Gaza genealogically. You do have some genealogical connection to Israel and to the West Bank. But what is your place in all this? And I say, exactly to your point, it is more important now than ever to give that visibility to Palestine, to the cause. In terms of this sport, the Sunbirds, are operating as a nonprofit. Myself, I used to be honestly quite guilty feeling that I would ever want to seek support or seek financial help from anyone else, especially because there are boots on the ground organizations and families that require mutual aid. Lately, though, Tracy, I'll be honest, I've really thought more about it and thought more about my presence and the impact I'm making. And so I feel less and less guilty now. And I am seeking influential Arab Americans and Arabs around the world, folks that can help me get to more places to represent Palestine. And so my two target events for this year are to represent for Palestine at the Pan Asian Track Cycling Championships in the Philippines coming up in March. Ultimately, I'd like to compete as the only able-bodied cyclist in the world for Palestine at the Pan Asian Games this coming September. And that'll be in Tokyo.
Wow. Well, guys, you heard him. We're going to have to raise some money to help this guy so he can make it and stop struggling, because I can tell probably it's expensive traveling, hotel, tickets, food, parts for your bicycle. I know those are not cheap.
It certainly is not, but Allah yarhamo, like God keeps me, despite, any injuries that I might get or how expensive the sport is. I really say God keeps me, and I pray very hard every day. I'm deeply religious on a personal level. And so I know that this is kind of a path and a purpose God has laid out for me. He has given me this gift of decent enough legs to compete at this level. And so I owe it to him, and I owe it to all Palestinians of all time to be as successful as I can be, to match that conviction of the Sunbirds, of other Palestinian athletes, and to live the dignity of what it means to be Palestinian.
So let's move on to the second portion, faith journey.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about your faith. Tell me about how your parents were raised, as far as you know, and how were you raised in the faith, and how you became devout the way you are today.
Yeah, Josie. Thank you. So my parents, of course, come from Nazareth, which is still quite Christian and quite Catholic. My maternal uncle is actually a Melkite priest in Nazareth, and so I grew up deeply religious, going to Holy Transfiguration outside of McLean, Virginia, which is one of the few Melkite churches that we have in the U.S. And so I went to Salah every Sunday as a child growing up. I've made a couple trips back to the old country, and I visited all the churches and the holy sites. I was there last in July of 2023, and I always get goosebumps going back, visiting the Church of the Nativity, the Church of the Resurrection, all the holy sites. And so, especially as an Arab American and someone that has spent a lot of time in Nazareth, in Haifa, and in Israel, there's a perspective I have, I think is quite unique, that isn't often talked about. And you might have mentioned it. And that is this culture of coexistence. And so just like we can't judge everyone in America to be like our leaders in our government, we can't really judge every citizen of every nation to be just like their leaders. And so especially when you live and you interact in the streets of Jerusalem, you can see there is coexistence between people of all backgrounds. There are religious pilgrims, there are travelers, there are natives. And so to your point, there's so much culture and connection. And it comes to the faith itself. There's a deep connection to the faith and the land. And so these days, I don't go to Salah. I'll be honest. I don't have a Melkite church local to me, and I haven't wanted to go to a Maronite church or a Greek Orthodox church. I know it's quite terrible of me, but I spend much of my free time training right now. And so I train 15 to 20 hours a week on top of my regular 40-hour-a-week job. And I also coach on the side. And so I'm quite busy trying to do as much as I can on the athletic side. But faith is always at the top and forefront of my mind. Like I mentioned, I'm deeply religious on a personal level. And so I always feel at home when I can visit family. If I go to Toronto and visit the Melkite church there, if I go visit the Melkite church in Pennsylvania, I always feel welcome. And so regardless of who is the parish in that particular church, whether they are Arab or not, whether they are Palestinian or not. I always find myself at home in most Catholic churches, but especially in Melkite churches, of course.
So both parents were Amalekite Christians.
Yes.
Okay, got you. So you were born in that denomination and that faith. Um, well, I give you advice, man. It's good to still try to go to church, even if you can't find the church that you belong to. As long as it's not a Zionist church, you'll be all
Oh,
right.
certainly not. Yeah, and unfortunately, in the age of technology, we can find a lot of live streams for our churches, and I know it's not the same, but it does help to set aside that time to be thoughtful and spend that time to speak with God and to maintain that personal connection. And so that is something that I try to hold on to desperately, dearly every day.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the struggles you had in the US being born and raised an American as a Palestinian American, Christian, and you see all these Zionists supporting the state of Israel, as they call it, occupied Palestine, Israel. I don't like to say Israel because that's supposed to be a precious name. So I call it what it is, Israel, because it's a counterfeit. So you being a Christian and seeing these people, instead of following the word of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ, they're following a pot of land with people that reject Jesus Christ, and they say those are God's chosen people. Like, how is your dilemma as a Christian trying to explain your Christianity as a Palestinian, where Christianity came from in Palestine, to American Christians? Did you have those conversations since October 7?
I do, and so I think this is a great point, Josie. Everyone in America, whether they've liked it or not, has had to become educated to a certain degree on Palestine, and so we find, of course, our American neighbors either know a little bit or they know a lot. And so the way I frame it, and it's not a fair comparison to preface this, but I tell my American friends that if you know nothing about Palestinians and the Palestinian plight, tell me, what do you think about the plight of the Native Americans, the Lakota, the Sioux, the other native indigenous tribes of the US? And I'll ask my American friends, well, what do you think about how we treated those folks and how we continue to treat those folks today? And Americans will say, well, what we did with the native indigenous people was awful. And now they live in small reservations. We've killed and genocided most of their populations over the last 200 years. And I say, exactly. Take the depravity of the erasure of entire peoples over the course of 200 years, boil it down into 70 years, and add elements of colonialism, of capitalism, and of world's allowance of all of the atrocities of Israel to happen. And I would say it is horribly comically condensed, but that is the situation we have in Palestine, is that it is one side completely overempowering and occupying a native land that was populated to begin with, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, before 1948, we had Jews, Muslims, and Christians as Palestinians living in peace. And now the percentage of Christians went down to barely 1% in the whole region of Palestine, occupied Palestine, Israel, Gaza, West Bank, all of that. There's barely 1% Christians. And people don't understand that there are Christians. I remember when I met some people and I started telling them about Palestine and I started talking about Jesus. They're like, oh, you're Christian? And I'm like, where did Christianity start, buddy? In New Jersey? I was like, it started what, in Israel in 1948? No, it started in Palestine. Jesus was born in Judea, Bethlehem in Judea, which is in Palestine, which makes him Palestinian. Is he the Palestinian that we are today? No, it's been 2,000 years. A lot of people went in and out, so we're mixed with some things. But if you do the DNA test, it leads us back to the land. So what does that make us? Maybe we're Canaanites and we are the real Jews, the Hebrews. We probably have Roman blood from the Romans, which means Italian. We probably have maybe Assyrian, Babylonian, probably Pharaoh of Egypt, Phoenician. I mean, who knows, right? But all we know is that we've been there for a long time, thousands of years. Yes, back in the day, Jesus didn't wave the Palestinian flag we wave, guys, because that's something that had to create for a sovereign nation. But it doesn't take away that he was born in a land that was called Palestine. And we didn't come from planet Venus or somewhere else and landed there. We didn't come from Arabia. We got Arabized. We
Yes,
spoke Aramaic before we spoke Arabic, and that's why we're called Arabs. But the Levantines are different, right? So
yes,
you
we are.
got Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Jordan, some Iraq. We're very unique.
We are.
Similar food, similar language, similar accent, similar dances, tatris, all that stuff. That's very from the Levant, from Bilad al-Sham, right? And we are the people of the land. We are the Semites of the land. But then you got these people that come on Europe from Europe on a boat and say, "No, this is our land. We got kicked out of there long time ago, and now we're coming back." And they have skin cancer because because they're not supposed to be there. So, as a cyclist, have you ever experienced any Zionist or anybody who's competing from Israel?
It's a great point. To be honest, Josie, it's a dream of mine to represent Palestine. I would love to travel to Israel one day and compete at the Sylvan Adams Velodrome right in Tel Aviv. I would love to make a podium, and even if it makes me hated, if it makes me escorted and I have to leave, that would be the biggest badge of honor that I could possibly ever have, is to race and compete and beat athletes from Israel. But as it turns out, I have not met any Israeli athletes yet in person. There are Israeli cyclists, and I'm not sure if you've heard, but the Vuelta a España, which is one of the biggest bike races in the world, it is actually sort of a smaller sibling to the Tour de France, was protested to the point of being stopped by pro-Palestinian protesters this year. And so the citizens of Spain came out in mass force, not for a day or two, but for 3 weeks straight. They closed down sections, and they really showed the world, the sportscasters, everyone live streaming this 3 week stage race, that no, it is not cool and it is not okay and acceptable for Israel to compete on the same world stage as everyone else, as if nothing else is happening in Palestine. We hold Israel to a different standard because if you look at another pariah nation such as Russia, Russia has been banned from the Olympics and from most international competitions. And so, despite the crimes Russia continues to commit, why don't we hold nations like Israel to that same standard? And so I applaud the people of Spain. I applaud the BDS movement. I applaud everyone that's ever taken up a stance, picketed, or taken a step on a march to march for Palestine and for Palestinians. My heart goes out to you, sincerely. And so, to your point, I have not run into Zionist riders while cycling, but in terms of Zionism while I race, I do unfortunately encounter strange things that are too strange to be coincidental. Things choicy, like, for example, if I register and I list my team affiliation as the Athletes for Palestine campaign, many times I've been listed in results as unattached or no team affiliation. Situations like that didn't make sense. I've been censored. I've worn shirts like this Free Palestine shirts on podiums and been censored. And so nowadays, you'll notice on my social media, whenever I make a podium, I try to be as present as possible, proudly wearing my keffiyeh wherever and whenever I can across the world.
Yeah, I mean, how are they going to censor that? They're going to have to blur blur your head and your body.
But
Wow.
Josie, I have one thing to add, and I think this would make a fantastic blip if you have to make like a 10-second or a 5-second reel. And that is really my argument for this podcast and for the listeners, is that the number one Palestinian of all time was an elite endurance athlete, Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus, of course, we know his journey. He suffered in the Judean desert. He fasted. He was calorically deprived. Uh, he walked how many treks from Nazareth to Jerusalem to Haifa to the Galilee that Jesus made? These are distances of 26 to 90 miles. And so he was quite well versed in endurance athletics. He was very fit himself. And by extension, I would say that Jesus Christ is the most successful coach of all time. How many billions of Christians have come since Jesus? And so I think it just goes to show you that, when we reframe and think about the humanity of what we can do with our physical bodies, not just the gifts of conviction, not just with what we can make money in terms of with our skills and our minds and what we study, we see this whole big picture of what Palestinians are, who Jesus was, and kind of our whole place in it. And so it is the honor and privilege of my life to try and represent Palestine in the capacities that I do.
Man, I can only imagine Jesus riding on a bicycle, man, and racing. He would probably beat everybody.
So think about Hebrews 12:1, run the race set before you. And so I think Jesus teaches us discipline, conviction, delayed gratification, thinking about goals long-term down the road, thinking about, I don't care what happens to me, I'm going to complete what I'm set out to do. And so the hallmarks of great athleticism are present in everything Jesus did in his day-to-day works. I don't know anyone out there that could farmers carry a 125 cross on their backs while bleeding for half of a mile. Find me a power lifter that has ever done that. And so I really, I love living as a Christian in God's image, trying to live in God's and Jesus's purpose and following in his footsteps with everything I do on it and off the track.
That's amazing, man. To God be the glory. So tell me about your trips back to Palestine and occupied Palestine, also known as Israel. When was the first time you went, and what did you discover every time you went back home?
That's a great question. So, Chosi, I have made 2.5 trips back to the homeland. My first trip was in 2002. I was about 12 years old, and it was completely eye-opening. I got to meet, of course, both sides of my family who growing up in America, I felt very isolated from. I felt nothing but warmth and love. I, of course, knew even less Arabic then than I knew now as a pale American child, but I enjoyed it. I always wanted to go back frequently, every year or every other year. Of course, after being 12 years old, you get sort of focused in middle and high school and academics. And so I had tried to make another trip at age 25. And so this was in 2021. Unfortunately, this was mid-COVID, and this was right before the vaccine had come out. And so strangely enough, during my second attempted trip, Chosi, to Palestine, I was stopped at Ben Gurion, and my U.S. passport was looked at, and I was explained to that, well, Israel is not letting anyone in because we don't trust Americans, and we don't trust American COVID passports because Americans and MAGA Americans are lying about their vaccinations. And so the excuse I was told was, well, it's not because your last name is Qadado and starts with a Q and clearly you're not Jewish that we're not letting you in. It's because you're American. And so I could say I didn't feel singled out because a few folks were prevented from my flight from coming into Israel, but sort of like Tom Hanks in the movie The Terminal, I was stuck at Ben Gurion and then sent back to the States from the flight I came in on. And it was heartbreaking. I couldn't see my grandmother in Nasri with dementia, and now she unfortunately does not remember me. And so it was always heartbreaking that I wasn't able to enter in 2021. Of course, the world got a little bit better. We did get the vaccine for COVID, and I made a trip in July of 2023 where I spent about 3 weeks all over Palestine, inside the wall, outside the wall, in the West Bank and in Haifa, so all over. And I even spent time at the Dead Sea. And so I have a unique perspective as someone with Palestinian family that cannot leave the West Bank, family that has Israeli identification, that can freely travel, and seeing that dichotomy, seeing how things were going on. But even though, Chosi, despite all of that, Chosi, when I was there last in July of 2023, as soon as I stepped out of Ben Gurion, there was already protests in the street. Israelis were already protesting Benjamin Netanyahu. He was already trying to take over the Supreme Court at the time. And this was 6 weeks before October 6th. And so knowing what we know now with the evidence and the journalism that's come out, there's a lot of connotation, a correlation between the time I was there and the bombing on October 7th. And so I was honestly unemployed at the time. I had been laid off from my job in America. And I was telling my family, I'm loving it here. I'd love to just stay in Palestine. And it has always weighed on my head, Josie. What if I had legally, illegally stayed in Palestine, past my visa expiration date in August or September? And I see the story of so many Palestinian Americans that either have visited since or have been stuck since or have been imprisoned since, and or even Americans that have been murdered in the West Bank with impunity. These are stories that will make headlines for a day or two, but nobody in the U.S. in terms of government officials is doing anything about this. And so it blows my mind how much the occupation has been allowed to get with. At the same time, given the timing of this episode and this recording that we're doing this week, our own country is doing just as depraved things, kidnapping other world sovereign leaders. And so it is mind blowing. But at the end of the day, all we have, despite our backgrounds, our racial backgrounds, our religion, is each other. So all we have is each other, Chosi. And so building up community, building up connections within Palestinians, Palestinian Americans, and even non-Arabs and regular Americans, regular folks in the West, I think is imperative. We only get through this together. And so that is the future, I think, that we need to be going towards. But it's not through segregation. It's not through checkpoints. It's not through a two-state solution, respectfully, if you ask me.
Let's talk about that part, the two-state solution or the one-state solution, or back to a Palestine with equal rights. What do you think is the solution to bring peace and equality and justice in that land?
This is a great question, Josie. I'm not certainly a political professional, nor a pundit even. And so knowing what I know and having lived my life, as a proud Palestinian American to parents that identify as Israeli Arab, I think that there is so much coexistence between the folks there. You have to look at the history, but also what is the world stage? The world stage of the way the world looks now in 2025 is different than it was in 1948, certainly. We can't go backwards. We can't bring back Jews that were murdered. We can't bring back Palestinians that have been murdered. So how do we heal from these traumas? And is there even a way to heal from these traumas? And I think these are the big pragmatic questions we need to ask ourselves as local, regional, and global societies. And so if we can't heal from the trauma, we're not going to find any sort of governance for a path forward, but it has to be equal. It has to be equal. And so I think, for example, in the US, we like to say that we go into other countries to democratize them and instill democracy, like in places like Iraq. And so I fundamentally disagree with that, but you have to have some level of human rights. And if human rights at the base level, Chosi, are not respected for both Palestinians and their Israeli counterparts, you will never find equality. You will never find the groundwork to which, a unified nation or a peaceful coexistence could be based and predicate upon.
I agree. I always thought, since we can't go back, the damage is done. And the people that came there are coming out of a trauma of their own, and then they commit, they're going out of a Holocaust and they commit another Holocaust on us. So now we have trauma because of that. The whole establishment of that state is by ethnic cleansing Palestinians, the indigenous people of the land. So, okay, to move forward, it needs to be one state. It can't be called Israel. So they're not going to want it to be called Palestine. Okay, let's call it the Holy Land. Okay. And we can have a white flag with the three religious symbols on it. The menorah for the Jews, and the cross for the Christians, and the crescent moon for the Muslims. We can decide the colors and all that. And equal rights for all citizens. The ones that don't want to stay there, they'll go back to Europe. Mostly the Jews that came from Europe. If they don't want to be there, they'll go back to where they came from. But the ones that want to coexist will stay. But equal rights. Nobody's above nobody. No Jew, Gentile, Goy, all this. No. A Muslim can worship in peace, a Christian can worship in peace, and a Jew can worship in peace, and all the other small minorities that should be there and practice their faith peacefully. Even if there's Hindus or Buddhists, I don't, that's your journey, your faith journey. I'm not there to judge you. You do whatever works for you, right? I can just plant the seed, tell you about Jesus Christ, and keep it moving. But I think that's the only solution then for Jerusalem because it's the Holy Land. And Jesus is what made it holy, by the way, for people that don't know why it's called the Holy Land. Then you'll have maybe a rabbi, a priest, and a sheikh that run Jerusalem and take care of the different quarters. We also have the Armenian quarter, which is Christian, so that can be taken care of by the priest. And then if something happens, then the religious leaders kind of like take care of that instead of political, because you remove the political aspect, which is Israel. Now it's about coexistence. So I think Jerusalem should be ran by the three faiths, people, up high, kind of like the Pope and whatever. And I think that's the only way we can live together and have peace. What do you think?
Absolutely. So I think you touched on something fantastic, Josie, and that is this concept of there is no such thing as separate but equal. I think the partition of Berlin, for example, post World War II, we saw it was not separate and not equal. The partition of the Warsaw Ghetto, not separate and not equal. In the U.S., the segregation between Black and white Americans, not separate and not equal. And then going back to that point I was mentioning about the indigenous Native Americans and the way they live in reservations in the Western states with very little economic and educational opportunities, certainly not equal. And so unless we have equal footing on these are the human rights and the dignity that we are all individually entitled to, regardless of who you are, what religion you are born into, we have certain inalienable human rights. And so we like to talk about this in Western law, but unless we fully embrace this concept, to your point, things will not change, I think, not even just in the Holy Land, but anywhere where there is injustice, where there is occupation, where there is genocide, because there are certainly multiple genocides going on in the world. And unfortunately, we have the one that is the most, I would say, unilaterally both visible, but also depraved, if you ask me. The level of depravity that the occupation is allowed to continue to do on a day-to-day after alleged ceasefire, has to stop. But at the same time, I say this as an American when my world leaders who do not represent what I stand for and what I believe in personally are also wantonly doing almost whatever they want around the world.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, there's two wings on the same dragon, and the dragon is Satan. People be like, oh, the left, oh, the right, Democrat, Republican. We've seen it. It doesn't
We
matter.
need to be human beings, Chuzzy. It's not about left and right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, well, George, this was a pleasure, man. I want you to tell the audience where they can find you on social media or any websites.
Absolutely. So if you're looking for me on social media, you can find me on Instagram primarily at Son of Quads. One word. It is a triple entendre for my word, my faith, and my big legs. You can also, I suggest you to follow the Gaza Sunbirds, the Athletes for Palestine campaign, and all the aforementioned athletic groups, the Gaza Skate Club, the swimmers coming out of Palestine now, the climbing associations, and all athletes. And so I would say and leave you with this, Chosi. If you're watching this and you're a young person, maybe you're a parent or an ammo or an achalto for someone who's young, growing up in America in first, second, or third generation. And if you happen to have some sort of athletic aptitude, I invite you as Arabs and Arab Americans and Arab Canadians, if you have some sort of athletic aptitude, lean into it, have that pride, and represent Palestine within sports because we belong on that global stage and we deserve to have respect, dignity, and visibility just like any other country in sports.
That was beautifully said, George Habibi. Well, may the Lord keep on blessing you, man. What a heart you have. So it was a pleasure getting to know you, man.
Josie, I absolutely love this interview. Thank you so much for your time and for having me on.
Habibi, yalla, free Palestine.
Free Palestine. Ahla sahla. Take care.
Salam. All right, guys, you heard it from George. What a beautiful soul, man. I love doing this, man. I get to know people and you get to know them with me. So we'll see how we can help him out if we can financially because things get expensive, guys. I can only imagine what he's going through. Until then, God bless you all. Christ is King and always free Palestine.